theme of our discussion is strengthening the role of private higher education sector for youth development in South Africa. So we have been running a series of critical dialogues focusing on education. So this is our last critical dialogue focusing on education. And this topic is very important to everyone who has a stake or an interest in private higher education. Private higher education institutions play an indispensable role towards education and development in this country. Be that as it may, we continue to face a lot of challenges in the private higher education sector, given the current policy framework. And this is an opportunity for us to put our heads together to deliberate on the situation in the private higher education sector and find solutions. So our discussion is going to be a very much positive discussion where we try to find lasting solutions to revitalize the private higher education sector. And I would like to thank all the distinguished guests who came, including our panelists, of which I'm not going to introduce the panelists. I will leave that to our moderator. I would like to say thank you to Mr. Basil Dramat. He is the CEO of Cornerstone Institute. I would also want to thank Dr. Koubus Oesen from Boston City campus. And I would also want to welcome Dr. Shirley Lloyd. She's an expert in private higher education. She has worked for the Council for Higher Education. And I would like to thank everyone else for being here. And I hope that your time here will be fruitful and you will see that this discussion is very important. So thank you so much for taking the time. I will leave the platform to Zipo Jeni to moderate the discussion, to first introduce the panelists and then moderate the discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Leo. Good evening, everyone. As Leo mentioned, my name is Zipo, and I'm the marketing manager at Cornerstone Institute. And just to recap in terms of what it is we're talking about tonight, we're speaking about strengthening the role of the private higher education sector for the purposes of influencing and impacting youth development. Without further ado, I'd like to call upon my panelists for tonight, who are going to contribute extremely meaningfully as we engage and unpack on the challenges, the financial challenges that plague the private higher education sector, governance, compliance, how we're going about educating, I think, the most significant stakeholder, and that is the prospective student who is to engage the opportunity to advance academically, because the disposition in our country is that our public universities, our public academic institutions cannot manage from a capacity perspective. And that's just one of the many challenges that we face. So without further ado, in no particular order, I'd like to call upon Dr. Shirley Lloyd, who describes herself as an educator, a public servant, an activist, and social entrepreneur. She believes in social justice and views her work in education and training, and particularly related to the NQF in recognition for prior learning, as part of fulfilling her life's work. She retired from the position of director of the NQF Directorate in the DHET, which was a position she valued and enjoyed. In her career, she has worked in the regional and international space with Inter Alia, the SADC Secretariat, the AU Commission, UNESCO, UN, EU, UIL, ADEA, IOL, and the Groningen Declaration Network, the Tanzanian Council of Higher Education, the Ethiopian Education Strategy Center, the Botswana Qualification Authority, well, ma'am, and the Seychelles Qualification Authority. She holds a PhD and the title of her thesis is Recognition of Prior Learning, a Social Entrepreneurial Praxis. She has also published and written articles and papers and is currently enjoying supervising master's and doctoral students. She believes that it is most important to remain current and active in one's field of study and is energized by applying the principles of Ubuntu, Batupili, and Tumamina. Welcome, Dr. Shirley. You can join me here. And then we've got Cornerstone Institute's Executive Dean, Dr. Marian L, who oversees various responsibilities, including teaching and learning, scholarship, faculty operations, academic quality assurance, with a career spanning over 18 years in higher education institutions. She brings a wealth of experience and expertise to her role. As the editor of the African Journal for Nonprofit Higher Education, Dr. Lo actively contributes to advancing scholarly research and publication with the institution. Additionally, she serves as chairperson of the Senate and various committees, playing a vital role in the governance and strategic direction of our organization. Dr. Lo joined Cornerstone Institute in 2021 as the Deputy Dean of Faculty Operations and Quality Assurance. In this role, she has significantly contributed to internal operations and developing robust quality assurance systems and procedures. And I can personally attest she's an advocate for work-life spirituality. Welcome. Welcome, Dr. Alrighty, and then welcome to Dr. Koubus Oesen, who is the Dean of Postgraduate Studies at Boston City Campus. He specializes in leadership, entrepreneurship, and strategy, with interests extending into the areas of technology, innovation, complexity, philosophy, ethics, AI, futures, and practical wisdom. He contributes to a popular press, academic conferences, academic journals, book chapters, and reviewer of academic journals. He supervises master's and doctoral students and serves as external examiner for various local and international institutions. Dr. Koubus was a recipient of the 2023 Monet Mostert Award for Futures-related PhD. He serves on the International Advisory Board of the Oesen University School of Business in India and the Conference Board of the International Business Conference. He holds a PhD in entrepreneurship from Northwest University and a PhD in leadership from the University of Stellenbosch. Dr. Oesen, welcome. And lastly, but definitely not least, our Umo Lio, who is a second-year psychology undergraduate student at Cornerstone Institute, where they currently serve as Student Representative Council President with a passion for student leadership and advocacy. Umo Lio is committed to enhancing student experience and fostering a thriving community within Cornerstone. Now, obviously, if you're going to have this kind of dialogue, he perhaps is the most significant stakeholder who needs to contribute and extend the disposition of someone looking through the challenges from the lens of a student. Welcome, Umo Lio. Alrighty. Okay, welcome everyone. If we get into the semantics of tonight's topic, we've mentioned that there are many challenges around private higher education. And in recent times, over things that we've seen and interacted with on public platforms pertaining to private higher institutions, the question around quality, around competence, around governance, around it being an alternative preferred choice for students to interact with, should they not be able to position themselves in the public academic environment. These are all things that have come into question, not without pre-existing challenges. And perhaps to start the conversation off, I'd like to ask I'd like to ask the defining question, and that's perhaps for you, Dr. Shirley, and you, Marian. What are the major differences between public higher education and private higher education?
Well, I think, in essence, and I think the list could become very long, but in my experience, the private institutions tend to focus more on the teaching and learning leg. If you look at the traditional model of the 3 pillars of teaching and learning and research and community engagement, and from what I've seen, the privates have tended in the past to focus more on the teaching and learning. That's partly also because of a legacy that they weren't funded for research, and there was absolutely no positive reason for them to engage in research. But that has changed over the last few years, and I think that plus the community engagement will become critical for privates if the private institutions want to be recognized as university colleges or universities in the new higher education types that are proposed.
Dr. Shirley, your thoughts?
I think my response will be some of the more practical areas, and I fully support what my colleague says there. But private higher education institutions, one of the big differences is that they have to be registered with a department, whereas public ones are deemed to be registered. Now, how good or bad that is, we can have our opinions. But so the registration issue for private higher ed is an expensive issue, resource intensive. So that's one of the big differences. There is no difference, and I want to stress this, and I know it comes up a bit later, but there is absolutely no difference between the hoops that public and private higher ed institutions have to jump through in terms of accreditation, however, with a quality council. The other big difference is private higher ed institutions do not enjoy subsidies or government funding at all. So we have to generate our own incomes through different ways. And I think that's a huge issue, and obviously that extends to the NSFAS bursaries, etc. One of the differences that I think people often don't see as a difference is that when the SETAs were established, Sector Education and Training Authorities, and that was around about the year 2000, it was the private providers, the private higher ed providers and the private colleges that were the institutional types that enabled that whole skills development system put forward through the levies and the grants and all of that to really find their feet and function, because the public institutions had to provide their PQMs, and they were funded according to what we call the NATED 150 and 550 and 191s and all of those, whereas the private ones were not. So I think that is one of the big differences, is that your private higher ed's got a foot in the door, if you want to, with relating far more closely to industry, to business, and having a bit more of an ear to the ground in that regard. So those are just some of the differences. We do not have to provide PQM data either to the department because we are not funded by them. And also even our learner management information system is different. Higher education, public ones, have to provide all the info to HEMIS, or the Higher Education Management Information System, whereas we go through what we call the HECMIS, which is managed by the CHE. And there's quite a lot of difference between the two. So it's a misnomer and a myth that there's no information about private higher ed. In fact, the HECMIS is very interrogative and provides a lot of info. So I've given a lot of the practical sort of areas where private higher eds and publics differ. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that gives us a great opportunity to segue to the next question, and that's around the contribution of private higher education in terms of access to higher education in the South African context. Dr. Oesen, what has been your experience in terms of how PHE contributes?
Thank you so much. Hello, can you hear me? Hey, all Right. My view is that private higher education contributes significantly to the broader higher education space in South Africa. And I would suggest by probably 15 to 20% of the total student enrollment figures. Now, if you go on data that's available, and perhaps maybe Shirley can direct me to other sources, but the statistics, the latest ones that's available with the CHE for 2021 statistics, and that indicated that private higher education institutions had about just over 203,000 students enrolled in that year. And that year there were approximately close to 60,000 graduates, and which just again indicates the significance. As far as international students are concerned, there were even around 13,000 international students registered with private higher education institutions. And I think that it's also significant that we contribute a lot in the age group of 35 and older, of the working adults, you know, those that perhaps, you know, that haven't had the opportunity earlier on to study. But overall, in my view, our contribution is significant, just based on those few numbers that I've indicated. And I think, if memory serves, there's about 131 private higher education institutions registered in South Africa. For me, probably the big thing is about the recognition of us.
Speaking of recognition, I think perhaps one of the challenges is around your stakeholders' understanding of the role that private higher education plays. So, for example, the fact that we're not able as a PHE to refer to ourselves as a university is something that does quite a number on the average receiver of that kind of information. What are some of the concerted efforts we can make to ensure that there is clear understanding of our positioning, what it is we offer as private higher education institutions, and qualitate that so that the individual, well, not qualitate that, but educate those who don't know on the level of quality, because what comes into question is the quality of the education that you are receiving by virtue of not having the word university attached to you.
I think if I could kick off there, and I'm going to make a few provocative statements, and it's okay because I've retired and I work for myself, so I can't be fired by anybody. But I think that part of one of the big issues that we have to keep on standing on and voice even louder is the fact that we are part of the post-school education and training system. In fact, the National Development Plan writes about private higher ed and calls for public-private partnerships and puts us very central to the success of the system. So the provocative statement is it has been a political view, politically driven view as well, by one or two of the ministers who have seen private providers and private higher ed providers as capitalists who want to get rich quick, take the money and run. And there's nothing further from the truth at all. So that is one of the big issues, that we need to claim our space as a player. And we are, in fact, Doc, at 22% currently, more than one fifth of higher education is offered through private higher ed. And the other very important thing is that we need to start voicing our opinion very strongly as private higher ed, as a collective of private institutions, to say we want to be known as universities, or our chancellors shouldn't have to be called presidents, but they should be chancellors and vice chancellors. And we should be pushing the department very quickly to bring in those 3 institutional types which level the playing field. Because really the quality issue, we all jump through the same hoops of the CHE. And we jump through the extra hoop of registration with DHET. So that's my little, and it's one of those passion points. So if I was a bit provocative in naming the political issue, but it's which we have to show is not the case.
Dr. Lio, your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree totally. And in an ideal world, I would want the government to do more to educate its citizens about higher education and, you know, the whole regulatory space that goes with it. Because what I'm finding is that the average member of the public, and I was that person before I actually worked in higher education, so I'm not blaming people for being ignorant, but people have no idea what a highly regulated industry we are working in. Yes, and we'll come back to the point of recent and other disasters, reputational flops and so on in the private sector, but really those are very peripheral. They are outliers. It's incredible what we have to do in reality to maintain our registration and accreditation status. And if the government is then not going to make the public aware of this, we'll have to do more on our side to make them aware that these are actually the things. It's our CEO is always complaining about the long documents that we have to submit to the CHE and the like. It's like a whole person's life history once or twice or 3 times a year. It feels like you're just busy with that. So it's with data and evidence and thousands of documents. You can't just say you're wonderful. You have to prove that you're wonderful. And I think we need to make people understand that.
Dr. Oosthuizen?
I'm getting all excited now. Absolutely. I just want to maybe, off the back of what was said, and the word just came on, we really need to evangelize our role that we're playing. And I made it my own personal business over the 16 years that I've been in private higher education. I recall when I attended the first SAPSA, the South African Business Schools Association meeting, the very first time, I could sense the animosity in the room. I could feel it, because I felt like I was looked down upon by the business schools, the big ones, the UCTs and the Gibbses and the et cetera, But I made it my mission to prove that we are equal, and in such a way, it's an example. I'm just telling you a story here. There were not one private business school in South Africa that have acquired international accreditation. And I made it my ambition to get AMBER accreditation for my previous institution that I worked with. And we then became the first private South African institution to get this international accreditation. And it was very expensive. Of course, that's the regrettable thing, to now spend all that money to prove to others that we are your equals. But I tell you that over the time, I am now acknowledged fully by my peers, and in a particular, in some of the sandboxes that I play in, the business schools area specifically. But if we're going to wait for them to, and I'm sorry, it sounds bizarre to say them, but I think you get what I'm getting at. To recognize us, then we're going to wait ad infinitum. We will have to demonstrate. And I mean, we've had academics from publics that have done, it happens, that do contract work for reviews or whatever. That I've been told that, goodness me, your quality assurance systems are, in a sense, even stronger than from where I come from. So I also frequently reiterate the quality assurance within the public space, the private space that I'm, in my context and where I've been exposed to, really, I would want to take on anyone who would want to come and make an accusation that our quality is not on par with the rest. But I think in the final analysis, we have to jump through the same hoops. Thanks.
So in the spirit of evangelism, what does it then look like collaborating within the private higher education community? Because you obviously need to set up structures where you are able to start fleshing out how that looks, how you are lobbying as a collective for what it is you need pathways to. And this is perhaps going to, this is the first question, and the segue to that, to the next layer of that question, then starts to talk to integration and participation from the other side as well. Because the challenge, the very distinctive challenge we sit with is lack of access, financial access, that enables the vast majority, that requires the channel which we have, the capacity which we have, and the quality of content available within private higher education institutions. That is what stands between us and serving that very needy community. So what does it look like? What are the first steps of collaborating and creating a communal space to start fighting for, I guess, the recognition, but not only that, the implementation of frameworks that help propel private higher education forward?
I think I have mentioned it a bit earlier, but we have to embrace the notion of a post-school education and training system, of which we are clearly written into all of the policies and documents and into the mindsets. We have to make sure that that becomes a non-negotiable. The CHE, I believe, is starting every time they talk about the public higher eds. If I am in the room, they will see my face and they'll say, and of course in the PSET system, because they know that my hand will go up and say, but you haven't recognized that. And I'm going to give you a practical example of that, how we, again, make sure our space is there. And I'll give you two examples of what we have done as private higher eds, as well as what we need to do more of. I serve in one of the CETA's higher education and research chambers. It's a CETA to which all of us, I suppose, in education, pay levies or contribute. And I serve on a smaller committee there as well for the sector skills plan. So we had 57 slides presented to us the other day by the particular CETA's research chamber, and it's their 5-year plan for the sector skills plan of the CETA. And all they spoke about was public higher ed, and bemoaned their fate that they didn't quite make the targets, etc. So I then was asked to provide comment. I provided comment in the meeting, and they were not happy because they thought I was being a bit direct. But I said, can I just be honest, your research is skew, it's not credible, it's not valid, and it's not relevant, because you've left out 20% of what happens in higher education. And then I wrote, and my husband, who's, I'm very grateful, brought me here, drove with me. I spent 4 hours the next morning from about 3:30 in the morning writing a comment on the 57 slides and saying exactly that, but in far more detail, and explaining why we play such a role. And I got a lot of very positive comment. But talking about how do we work together, because there's the notion that we are in competition with each other. Private higher ed institutions are in competition. When the COVID-19 pandemic was at its height and suddenly everything went into lockdown, and overnight people in the education and training space had to move from face-to-face or maybe hybrid, blended or distance, had to move into this online space. It was fine for the more resourced institutions, But what about the smaller ones or the ones in areas where resources were not so available? And from APET, the Association of Private Providers of Education, Training and Development, I currently chair that association. And we decided to do a survey very quickly at the request, well, we had a request from the ministry. I used to work in DHET, so I often get phone calls. Can you quickly help? One day I'll charge them something, but at the moment it's still a duty to the country. And we did a survey amongst all of our private higher ed institutions. And you know what was happening? It was an incredible thing that was happening, is that the bigger, better resourced institutions were putting out their hands to the lesser resourced and to the more rural or semi-rural institutions. And they started working together. And they shared information. They shared their online work. They shared all of that. And it was an incredible thing that happened. Everybody started commenting how the sector, private higher ed sector, pulled together virtually overnight and started enabling, helping, sharing expertise, letting people share their data, providing. It was an incredible thing. So we can work together, and we do work together when we have to. But we have to, as you said, evangelize the place that we actually share in higher education. And I'm sure our student and our on-the-ground colleague in Cornerstone have the real-life experience of those things.
Dr. Oesen?
Did you say on the ground or underground?
No, I just wanted to use the word which, and I have no names, let's rather talk about co-opetition instead of competition. We can compete but we can certainly cooperate and collaborate on many, many things.
Dr. Lio, your thoughts?
Yes, Cornerstone is a member of more than one forum for private higher education institutions. That's proven, I think, very fruitful for Cornerstone and this whole collaborative, because we're all in the same boat, has been very beneficial. And in my personal experience, one of those bodies that we recently joined, there came a conversation in a particular meeting where we talked about, because everybody now has had to respond to the Department of Higher Education and Training's proposed new higher education types. And I welcome the new types in principle, because finally there will be a unified system where we all are supposedly seen as equals and classified as a particular something in this unified classification. But the draft proposal or the draft policy, we then discussed in the meeting, and we did an official response from this particular body. And I think, and the conversation went around the fact that it was the document, the draft by the DHET was actually drafted in a way that it does not speak to private higher education and the particular lived realities in which we find ourselves. It was almost drafted as if for public institutions, because that is the exposure that they come from. And so we have drafted a formal response with some proposals and so on that can accommodate us in that bigger picture. And I think that just makes your voice so much stronger. I mean, if Cornerstone Institute in the Western Cape says something, is the government really going to take notice? But if a wider body representing private institutions that contribute significantly to 20% of higher education students, if they say, this is what we want and this is what would be fair, it gets heard, because it's not just one little institution that says that.
Thank you very much. The next question is, I think, for everyone on this panel, including you, Umo Lio, and it's around education being fundamental for development and growth, this we know. Enabling and encouraging higher enrollment, disadvantaged groups, and youth is essential. Are we delivering the promise of youth development through access to education and training in South Africa?
No, but we're trying. That's the short answer. I think the need is so large that it will take us years to fully fulfill it. And it pains me that there are people out there, and I was actually discussing this with a student just before this event, and we were having a nice chat about this. But it pains me as an educator that there are people who are educatable out there, but they cannot afford it. They don't have the opportunities, they don't have the finance. And so it remains something that we all need to take responsibility for, including the government. But I don't think as private higher education, we can rely simply on the government distributing the resources better or more fair in our view. But I think for us, the solutions may lie in partnerships with business, with NGOs, with the sectors in which our students will work, but more needs to be done. Another thing that we do on the Cornerstone side, and that many other institutions are doing, and that we were also discussing before the event, is recognition of prior learning. So important, and at Cornerstone we've used that extremely strategically in the last few years, driven by the registrar, that this is our way of giving access to people who traditionally did not have access, so they get credit, RPL and credit transfer. So both formal and informal learning are recognized, and it's so important people actually doing the job and having been doing the job for ages to recognize their skills and their knowledge and to get them in the system to get a qualification for it. Of course, that still is not free of charge, but it helps a lot. So RPL is one of our ways that we also implement strategically.
Thank you, Dr. Lio. Umo Lio?
Hello, everybody. I'll have to agree very much with Dr. Lio, what she mentioned earlier, that a lot of students, from my perspective as well as myself being a student, being in the SRC at Cornerstone, at the viewpoint of how other students view, of course, private higher educations, and it's been quite a difficult conversation with a lot of students because, of course, the majority of them who are trying to get that kind of education, of course, cannot afford it. A lot of them, of course, start off the journey with the application, the registration, and then that's it. Now they're left with bills that they can't pay, but the end goal is, of course, to get that degree at the end of the road. That's the main. How can I say it properly? That's the goal, to get educated, to have what they need. And one thing I can agree with my fellow panelists to mention, especially about the evangelism of private higher education, is putting it out there to the vast majority of prospective students that, hey, you have an opportunity. Yes, it's not going to be for a lot of them affordable, but it opens a chance for you, an opportunity to at least go on with your life the moment you're finished with your degrees, and just to, carry on. But I do feel like a lot of private higher educations do not offer, they don't really guide students into how they can get assistance financially, properly. Because I do know Cornerstone, they do that. Other educations just throw you to big industries. They just tell you, hey, get a loan and just pay us, basically. And students, at the end of the day, they can see that I'm going to get this loan and that's it. I'm going to be left with more bills upon more bills. So I feel like that properly going out to students and telling them, hey, this is what we can offer. And another point I actually wrote down is a lot of probably prospective donors for students in private higher educations have the same viewpoint as students, where they see private higher education institutions as money grabbers or just places where we all know from previous stories, how things go, especially with private higher educations in different provinces, how things don't go all too well. So I feel like really going out there and expressing that, hey, you have a chance with private higher educations. There's a board, there's certifications that we have as this sector, that we are here for you. We can figure out the way for you. We're not going to throw you in the deep end and tell you to go there and apply for this and get that. So I feel like right now in this journey for a lot of students, they need to know that there is a chance for them to actually get that kind of, how do I say, like breakthrough for them to actually get that education that they do want. So as I mentioned, that I agree with Dr. Lo that the steps, it's starting to, I won't say starting, but it's getting there, but currently, no, not really. Like, there isn't much help from a lot of private higher education, like other schools and colleges out there as well.
Dr. Shirley?
I agree with Dr. Lo that unfortunately at the moment the answer is no, the access is quite limited. And I'm going to again make a few provocative statements, and this is something that we have to again deal with. People wrongly believe that everybody who goes to a private higher ed institution or a private college, that they are rich. They are not. And research has been conducted, and I know we don't like saying research has been conducted, so who did it, etc. Well, there is research to back it up, and I could give you all the different references. But research was conducted across the higher ed system, and particularly in the private higher ed system, that a lot of young people were in fact funding their studies through crime. And one of the, if you want to call it, top crimes, because the youngsters are clever and are used in that way, would be in car hijackings, for example. They logistically, they could do it, they were clever, they were able to do it. Also drug running, and most of them were not taking drugs at all. And sadly, prostitution as well, to fund. And it's not only in the public space that happens, but in the private space. And when that reality hit, that not everybody who goes to a private higher ed institution has the money to do so, I think that started the realization that we have to push. And there is nothing legislatively stopping us from pushing for the NSFAS bursary, for example, for the means test to change. In fact, right now, and again, provocative statement, and I'll probably get into big trouble, but it's against our rights to say it's only for public students in public institutions, because we can change the means test. And we could say everybody who studies and whose family earns under 350,000 a year should access NSFAS, not only students in public. And why do I say that's so important? Because we know that the public system, and I think it was Dr. Lo that was saying it, the public system can only absorb X number of what we used to call bums in seats. In the days when I was still involved and a principal of 2 different technical colleges, in fact, we used to have to count how many, because you only had so many funded, and the rest you had to generate your own income. And so the public system can only absorb X number. They want 1 million or whatever. They can't absorb them because they don't have money to pay for it, or say they don't have money. And yet there's a huge money pot out there. That's a discussion for another day. And so we know that the private higher ed system absorbs large numbers of students. And I would like to throw into the mix the concept of really excellent student support. And our student colleague raised it. We really need our private higher ed institutions to come to the party and re-examine, reimagine, and recreate what student support really means. What is it all about? Everything from negotiating very low interest loans from banks, financial places, to corporate social investment from companies, to CETA bursary funds, etc., across the range. But we need to do something in a consolidated way that can put that right center and front, because if we don't do it, we really are letting our young people down.
Thank you for those inputs, Dr. Shirley. I think I want to extract or pull two very key points. You talk to student support, and you talk to the financial aspects of what student support should look like in terms of structure. Dr. Lowe spoke to partnerships, enabling that, understanding that the current disposition is such that we don't, or the private higher education sector does not benefit from government funding, right? There are challenges therein as well, where you've got a situation where there are organizations or corporate structures that have enormous budgets for corporate social investment, but those budgets need to align to the skills that they want to invest in. Now, as an institution, we offer a particular bouquet of academic qualifications that may not align to an Investec, for example. And yet the need is there. We understand that there's a service need that aligns to these qualifications. How do we then begin to engage corporates to somewhat alter the structure by which they decide on what to invest in? Because it's not that private higher institutions are not knocking on corporate doors. Oftentimes, it's the legislature that governs those trusts. It's the KPI or growth indicators that govern how they go about recruitment. It's their internal recruitment strategies that align to what they support and what they don't. And so we sit at the mercy, whichever way you may look at it, of where and what an institution or corporate wants to invest in. How do we jump through those hoops? Dr. Oesen.
Sure. That is a difficult one to answer, because I don't want to say having appreciation for the reason for being or the mission or whatever of a particular industry type, whether Investec or whatever. Now they would have a unique set of needs of the talent that they would want to acquire. So I think that the interface between private higher education and corporate, and I'm talking now the broad spectrum, needs to get closer. We really need to have a sincere understanding of what their needs are, because if we can address them, there are possibilities. So for me, along with the funding thing, or the bouquet that you refer to, relevance is also extremely important. And I find that there are privates that are actually offering programs that are unique, that would typically not find with the public institutions. I just think it would be, I don't want to say impossible, but from the corporate social investment perspective, and I don't want to use that name because you're recording stuff here. just now I have a knock on my door. Yeah. So, but if we look a really broad spectrum, not just the financial services institutions, we take it, we look at mining, we look at engineering, we look at other technology, manufacturing, retail, agriculture, marine. There's so much, and I know an institution can also not meet everybody's needs. You got to find your niche, so to speak. But I also want to add maybe on for us to become really self-reflect and become innovative and creative on finding ways. The issue of funding will, it is as if we become paralyzed. It's like a guy who wants to start a business. I want to start a business, but I can't get funding. Now there's being the entrepreneur, think money last. Last. So you've got to first figure out a bunch of other things, and then. But if you start off with that money, I can't. Money. So let me get back to us. I read about an interesting approach that's not here. They use it in the States. They call it income share agreement. It's now, there's pros and cons to it. So in other words, I come to you, and I want to be a student, and you say, right, okay, we're going to go into an income sharing agreement. Meaning that you will come and study, you'll complete your studies, and as soon as you find work, then you start paying back, it's sharing of my income. Of my income. So that's just one little example. Philanthropy is another, and I know it's words. I know it's not. How do we find these philanthropists who are eager to give to causes? But now, the moment they hear, no, but you're private, you're you profit or whatever. They think you are for profit. No, but you generate your own money. So why would you need any philanthropic donations or grants or whatever the case might be? But I think we also need to explore these other avenues, just off the back of what else was said. And I think it's having these dialogues that we can perhaps start giving some of these things to manifest, to become reality. I promise you, for those that us who do this from our hearts. Now, just by the way, the longest distance in the universe is the distance between the head and the heart. If we can bridge that, bring the two together, then you can move towards solutions. We, in this room, really reflect about these things and about finding ways and means to make it broader, more accessible, because there are potential, and potential can only translate to energy if there's a catalyst, the role that we will fulfill. Sorry, I'm digressing, but we have to consider alternatives, creative, different paths or avenues of releasing monies that are there.
Speaking of releasing monies, Dr. Lio, why have we not won the NSFAS chat as private higher education?
Yeah, I don't think I'm the best person to answer that question. I think because we've been made aware that technically NSFAS must actually be available to all students below that 350,000 a year income. But with what has happened in NSFAS, particularly this year, it's like, why fight for something that's not working? It's not coming through, even for the people who already qualify for it, in many instances. So I think I'm really hoping that with the new institutional types, there will be no longer a fight. But until we get there, and we can continue the conversations about NSFAS, although I think as a country we now have a few other priorities that we're sorting out politically and so on. So I'm not sure that education and funding education is at the foremost of our leaders' minds at this moment. But the conversation does need to continue. But in the meantime, we'll have to be creative. I agree with Dr. Oosthuizen there. And I also think that we need to change from the inside out. And what I've seen is that private institutions have already done that much more than public institutions. But I still find, even in private institutions, that idea that, for instance, I'm an academic. I'm only here to teach. Don't ask me to do anything else. And unfortunately, we're in a complex reality that will often, the types that we have in our minds of this is an academic institution or this is an academic job that I'm holding, there's actually a shift towards business skills requirements where you have to think like an intrapreneur to make your business, your entire institution, or to make your department work at a different level. You can't just teach well. Many of us do, but that doesn't sell tickets. We have to get the right people on board. We have to forge the right partnerships. But if we, first of all, think that's not our job, we won't be doing it. If, second of all, we do think it's our job, but we actually don't have time or any prioritization strategically around that, we're also going to lag behind.
Dr. Shirley?
I think just picking up that NSFAS thing, I know that there's that perception, and certainly not only a perception, but realities, that there are a lot of complexities and issues around the NSFAS bursary, but it's a system that has to be relooked and rethought. And it's not the fault of NSFAS itself, if you had to put it that way. There are lots of steps along the way. Have people asked, for example, why do students get their money so late? And we're talking here now public institution students. Why is there a problem? When surely I've written my exam, and let's face it, the universities finish their exams, get their results in late November, early December, or even early January. So that institution should be sending its results or the reports of the throughput and who passed, who didn't, etc., to the department somewhere in the department and uploading it. Why doesn't that happen to the department? Those results are going elsewhere and not to the department that has to confirm the throughput and therefore the registration so that the NSFAS money can be paid. Has anybody ever asked why there's that huge gap of months between the department getting the data and being able to say, yes, that's fine, the student's registered? Because there are lots and lots of other little middle people running around in the middle, and there are lots and lots of rands going from who gets the results to then confirm those results and pay back some money back to the universities, etc., etc. So there's all of that happening. So NSFAS as a system should work if it works as it's intended to. So the system has to be looked at. The middle people have to be cut out somewhere along the line. And may I use the word corruption? It's a word we know very well in South Africa, so it's not a bad word. It's not a swear word. We use it a lot because it happens a lot. And have a look at all of those things. But I think for me, coming back to corporate social investment, social investment, that's what it says, corporate social investment. Very interestingly, I've just got a new doctoral student to supervise, and that's what her thesis is all about, how this stuff works. The other issue, of course, when you're looking at that, is that companies are incentivized through tax issues. And then the other area that we could be looking at is if you're offering a learnership, and this is something higher education institutions are discouraged from offering their qualifications in the form of a learnership. Now, if you offer it in the form of a learnership, you have quite a nice chunk of money coming your way, pre-tax profit, on the learnerships. So there are ways and means that we need to look at how we bring in that funding, how we support the students, how we help, how we are creative in thinking of ways to access a very large pot of money out there that's not being used as it should.
May I just add a little, something I forgot. I know of no private higher education institution, if there are, please help me, that draw on their alumni. Yeah. And if I know of universities, I'm not going to make names here, very wealthy universities, that draw from their donations from their alumni, the billionaires, the millionaires that give back. As a matter of interest, maybe you know this, the 8 Ivy League universities in America, Harvard, Yale, they're all private. Now I know they are more than 100 and whatever years old. They are the richest universities in the world, the Harvards and the Yales and the Penns and the whatever else. They've got so much cash on hand, it's scary. I just want to use that analogy. They also draw heavily on their alum. Now, I know it takes some years to build up an alum base. I'm thinking of one, a very successful entrepreneur in Dubai from a previous institution. So those are the kinds of people that we must have the, so-and-so, you are a beautiful, wonderful product of this institution. How would you, Yeah. However, now, as you've indicated, if you donate to a private who's a PDY limited, for the donator, there won't be a tax benefit. That's why the publics they get a tax benefit. So maybe also in our advocating for recognition is that perhaps the private higher education institutions to get tax rebates from government as another possibility. There's so many of these things. I'm sorry, I'm throwing them all over. But the alum, remember, don't forget the alumni.
Thank you very much for those contributions. Now, the issue of technology, our labor market, the economy, changing incredibly fast is a real one. To what extent is private higher education responding to these changes in the real world of work?
In my mind, the first half of my answer would be that, in my experience, private institutions respond better to changes in the marketplace. We are more relevant in terms of job skills and actual job requirements, etc., etc. But if we look at the technological advances, that side of the question, then I think even like there is elsewhere in the world, even in higher education and private higher education, there's a digital divide. Because like Dr. Lloyd was saying, not all students at private higher education institutions are rich. Not all higher education institutions are rich. And for instance, Cornerstone Institute is a non-profit, which makes us not entirely unique, but a different class and category of private education entirely, with its own challenges. But so your richer private institutions very easily keep up with the technological advances, which they then apply in their teaching, and they train their students in, whereas your smaller institutions then, who don't have the money, I find that they can sometimes lag behind even the publics. So you've got this one part of privates that are better and faster and more agile than the publics, and then this other little tail, knowing what they're supposed to do, but not quite catching up. The little doggy also wanting to be in for the fight, but, with legs this long and so on. So that is a challenge. I do think that there's a little bit of a digital divide too.
Umo Lio?
One thing I can add, especially with regards to technologies and the update, of course, is I feel like a lot of private higher educations offer a lot of updated programs to what public institutions do offer. There's a lot of programs that the big leagues in South Africa don't have. Privates do have, for example, certain programs. Cornerstone even has. A lot of them, of course, better equip a lot of students going, whether it's undergrad, whether it's honors, better equip them for the real world, for job markets, for potentially finding even better prospects than public higher institutions. And I still feel that, of course, it, as I mentioned, now, better equips them. There's a lot that private institutions offer. There's, I'm digressing now. There's so much that privates offer that publics don't, and whether it's technologies that, of course, are still updating. I do know I have a lot of friends of mine who are going to public institutions who I can compare myself to and see maybe we're doing the same course, or maybe they're doing honors or either undergrad or whatever course they're doing, that, wow, private institutions actually do have better equipment than some public places. And it's, I don't want to say like in that way, but of course, going into the workforce after you finish, you just see that a lot of public institutions, the students, of course, once they're done, they're done. But for example, in private institutions, there are, of course, better lecturers. I won't say better lecturers, I'll just say that there are better options. They are more well-trained on how to approach certain markets. They are more trained on how, of course, there are a lot of updates that I feel like private institutions can quickly update with the force and everything, but with public institutions, there's a lot of lobbying, there's so much people to go left and right to, but with privates, I feel like it's easier. That's why there's so much improvement, whether in the classrooms, whether in certain curriculum. Of course, they try to keep it the same, but I feel like private institutions can, how do I say, they're more, they're better equipped to change with the times, basically.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think often your private higher ed institution offers for that niche market, and it's geared up to do that, and it certainly is more agile in a way to be able to respond more quicker, and get done what needs to be done for people. But I think something I saw in Germany a couple of years back, which I thought was a very, very good idea, and I actually wrote about that thing, and they called it an edu hub or edu park. And what they did, and I saw a beautiful example of it in Cologne. So not every university or private higher ed institution or college, whatever, has their own laboratory for this, a laboratory for that, but they rather have an edu park. And within a 5-kilometer radius, you would book out your times for your students in that edu park, and it's a massive environment. So the computer rooms are there, everything you could think of, the simulators, simulation opportunities, etc., and sharing of technology. And we are in a situation where Dr. Lowe is right and our student colleague is right, where there is access, there are access challenges, and there's exclusionary practices, and we have to get to the point where we start thinking technological inclusion. So that when you're designing something, and this is something I believe every single higher ed institution and college needs to do, don't start designing your course or your program with the highest level technology in mind. That's exclusive technology. Start designing your program at the lowest common denominator. What would that student at that level be able to use and access? And then you build on that, and that's inclusive technology. And you start then looking at working with other institutional types to enable your students to go and get the richer experience of an EduHub. Again, it saves a lot of money, and I saw that, as I say, in Germany, which we would think is a first world country with everything at hand. But my plea is always, and I suppose that's a bit of the activist and the social activist inside of me, because I suppose we've all seen life, and I think I've seen life as well, and seen that, and your heart goes out. We owe a moral debt, I believe, to our young people in this country. And those are strong words, but because of the background that they come from. And it's going to take another couple of years to sort that out. There are many young people who do not even have a bookshelf in their home with books in it. And yet they are having to, in a way, compete with others to be able to be in learning spaces. So my plea is, as we design programs, as we develop our higher education qualifications, and we start looking at what we offer, start at the lowest common denominator place, the inclusive technology, and build from there to make access easier, technology more available, work in partnership, edu-hubs, edu-parks, public-private partnerships, bring the corporate social investment people on board, the banks with the zebras and whatever else, and punt those notions to them and say, let's use our money wisely to benefit everybody. We have to do that. We simply have to.
Thank you very much, Dr. Oesen.
Yeah, no, I can just echo what has been said. You know, that's among one of the reasons in our modality that we have 47 support centers across the country. For those students that do not have the technology at home, that it is accessible to them, they can go and sit there, the computers are there, the Wi-Fi is there, that's just one example, but that's our premise, is the lowest denominator. You don't design, you know, with up there. Just getting back to the technology and our role in educating our young people, my gripe with the exponential advancement of technology is that we can be agile and flexible and very quick, yes. But I'm going to use just one example. I developed an advanced diploma in AI and big data for management. It's beautiful. However, now it must jump through all the hoops. We can't get it out there and get the people 18 months maybe. Then it could, or 24, then it gets accredited. And then, by then, 2 years later, AI has, you know, we'll have to start again. So we really want to be quick to market with these things. But that's also problematic. And I'm not afraid, that's the wrong word. But education generally are going to be in for a surprising ride with the way things are going. Hence the regulatory system would also have to adjust and become more accommodative. Turnaround times needs to be quicker in order to do what we are so passionately wanting to do, so that young people do not, that we don't stay behind with the wave that's running away from us.
So essentially the task at hand for accredited structures is to fast-track quality assurance.
Micro-credentialing comes to mind as one of the ways that we start fast-tracking teaching and learning, and also making sure we're speaking to what industry wants. And if necessary, you don't have to have it yet registered as a qualification on the NQF, but you offer it as a non-formal program to start off with, micro-credential, and build it into something. There have to be ways that we are able to get to market quickly. We are able to then draw from market, go to the bank with a zebra and say, we've got a micro-credential or 2 or 6, maybe come and use some of your laboratories or your equipment or whatever to train the people on there. And very interestingly, to get it to market quickly, industry is starting to say, we don't have time for the regulators to first go round. We will do it and recognize the skills if they've got them anyway, whether you've got it registered there. So I think that that's the other side that we need to. I'm just sorry when we went to the elections the other day that we also didn't have another ballot thing to put all the regulators there and vote whether we like them or not. Sorry, I didn't say that. I worked in the space. For many years, I was one of the people who thought about NQFs before there were NQFs. But when it starts becoming a hindrance to being able to have our people skilled, our youngsters and our older people over 35s, reskilled, upskilled, multi-skilled, when we cannot take good ideas to market quickly so that people can become employable or self-employed, then something is going wrong. And we need to then correct it. So I'm not starting a revolution, but I am saying if you've got good ideas and it's not yet registered, offer it as a non-formal course that can then be developed further into something, and also look further than CHE as a quality council. There's the QCTO, which allows the registration of skills programs right up to level 8 of the NQF and open-ended there. So there are lots of other ways that we can start working and getting our younger and older people upskilled, reskilled, multi-skilled and educated.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lloyd. I think at this point, I'd like our audience to join the chat. What are your thoughts? What are some of your questions for our panel? What are your contributions? What is your disposition where strengthening the position of private higher education for the purposes of youth development? Anyone for the taking? Guy in the middle. Hi, I'm all right. Thanks, how are you?
My name is Skeleton Dlovu, and I'm from Molam Flower Schools. It's a non-profit organization.
Fantastic school.
Oh, thank you.
Fantastic school.
So I'm the instructional coach for the school. So our challenge then is with the CETA, and whereby level 4 and 5 is kind of being stopped as accredited. So we're finding it hard to find teachers whereby they can come into Khayelitsha as well to come teach. So we have then decided or started an institute, which we're going to call Molam Flower Institute. So my question then is, what is your advice to us? And then secondly, is there maybe a way we can kind of collaborate with Cornerstone or the other college
that one's
as well?
for you.
So I think that goes to Dr. Lloyd. Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll answer the second part. I think Dr. Lloyd would be able to give better advice, but yeah, we're always up for a conversation about collaborating. And I think what would be special to us is to collaborate with another non-profit organization, because you know our world. So yeah, let's meet for coffee.
Business card?
I think, were you talking about the qualifications that have been deregistered recently?
Yes.
Is that what the so-called legacy qualifications, is that what you're talking about?
Level 4 and 5.
Level 4 and 5, what kind of quals?
ECD, so.
Oh, early childhood development. Yes, yes. There are a whole lot of answers around there. If I could just very briefly say, there are 3 things that a person can look at. The first thing is a lot of them were deregistered, and the QCTO looks after that particular area of qualification. So recently, as recent as about a week or 2 ago, the minister, when he was still minister then, we don't know who the minister is now, that minister, Dr. Nzimandi, he then signed a thing that said 26 odd legacy quals that had been deregistered, he was extending their lifespan. So have a look there first. Are they part of that group that have had a life extension? The other issue, if those were qualifications that were offered through the TVET or technical colleges, TVET colleges, the NCVs, I don't know if those are what you're talking about?
So it's a mental qualification. So ECD with the mental philosophy, integration in that sense.
Okay. Have a look, are they deregistered? And are they part of this one given lifespan? The other thing is all the occupational qualifications, and I know there's a lot of Educare ones, and ETDP CETA is the CETA that is supposed to be looking after making sure that there are qualifications in that space that people can continue training. Have a look if there are any of those that were registered and are called occupational certificates. They have had their lifespan extended to 31 December 2025. So you could have a look at that kind of thing. And then there are new ones that are being developed. But one of the good things to do is to actually get hold of the Quality Council for Trades and Occupations, and say to them, this is an urgent need in the ECD space. Or also get hold of an organization, NECTA. Do you know NECTA, the National ECD Association? I work quite closely with NECTA. And I, funnily enough, serve on a committee for the QCTO that looks at qualification development, and I will certainly raise that fact. And also, I'm sure through Leo, you'd be able to give the contact so that I can just have a look at that qualification and give you better information, factual information about what is happening in that space. I know at one stage that the department also said that to be able to teach in an ECD center, you need certain qualifications, and they said to be the minimum admission requirements to teach in those is now this, and they didn't want to recognize those qualifications. However, I think even that has now been, is being looked at again because of this move of ECD from social development to the Department of Basic Education. And because there's a shortage of about 32,000, if not more, ECD educators that will, no, 200 and something thousand ECD educators that will be needed. Again, a very big RPL project could be in the offing to bring those educators that don't have the right qualifications up to scratch. So there's a lot happening. Leo, I'd be more than happy to receive an email from our colleague and then be able to give information and put him in contact, introduce him via email to different people, so that, because ECD is hugely important.
All right, fantastic. Yes, ma'am.
Good evening. I just want to highlight. All right, I just want to, before I pose my question to you, I just want to highlight the significant importance of your graduates within the market field. I'm a professional nurse, and I've met many graduates of Cornerstone, of which 2 of them are volunteers within the nonprofit that I run, which is a very good starting point, because not only are they experienced, but they are men and women who are very compassionate about uplifting society. So that is quite significant to make mention, especially with regards to the evangelism part. You know, I'm not sure about them coming back to just fork in a little bit of this and that financially, but they can most definitely be ambassadors of the institution, because we get to meet them in a work environment. So my question to you is, the program that I run is a legacy program. We visit rural, informal settlements and the farms. We try to encourage the whole prospect of, you know, children being parentified and having not to finish school. We get them through to grade 12, but then after grade 12, it's a bit of a hurdle to get them to any institution, whether being private or public. So I wanted to just pose that question to you. How can we then create an atmosphere or an environment where each and every case of this nature can be evaluated? Because the psychosocial background really does mean that we would not have registration. None of the parents are working, neither are alive in some instances. And so there is just no prospect of this child ever getting to access higher education. And if you look at their grade 12 results, you will realize that these are well-deserving pupils. I just want to find out if we could have something of that nature, because I already have a long list of matriculants. They've got their bachelors, but we haven't really been able to succeed in placing them in higher institutions.
Yeah, we're always very interested to talk about that and to look at specific cases. I think the micro-credentials here are important, and yeah, I think there are ways that you can create access in which, for instance, if you start off those candidates with maybe sponsored short courses, you get a sponsor for that, and those short courses can be credentialed later on into a higher certificate, for instance. And if that student comes past that hurdle, maybe they can get accepted into a diploma or a degree. So there's ways, it's a longer journey, but if they are deserving, as you say, and it's just their circumstances that have held them back, particularly finances, there is a way for them to get somewhere. And I mean, each case is unique, so I can't make a blanket promise or anything, but I think certainly us at Cornerstone, but other institutions as well, our heart is access, because that's where we started. I'm not sure how widely this is known, but we started more than 50 years ago as a theological institution during apartheid, when black potential pastors couldn't study with white pastors, and that's what we were doing at the time. So our heart is still those who are being held back by their circumstances, if we can do something we want to.
All right. Yes.
Hello, and firstly, I would just like to say thank you to Cornerstone for having this dialogue and opening up to the general public as well, because I don't particularly come from any institution where I saw an advert. I just saw it on LinkedIn and I was like, well, this is a point of interest for me. Dr. Lloyd, I would like to appreciate your honesty and your take in saying that when we're designing our education system, we should think about it in the lowest denominator because of the current circumstances that people live in South Africa. And understanding that there's a huge number of graduates who come from the public institutions that are not employed. Some are very well employable. However, the circumstances just do not align for them at the moment. Then, if we link that understanding to the fact that in the private higher education, there is more employability access, so to speak, can we then not make a case for institutions like NSFAS that here, we produce this amount of students and they are very employable, we are recognized in the business sector, can we then not have it accessible for the general public in that sense?
Thank you very much. I think that that is part of the urgent push that we have started. And I think we are starting to work across the system with other higher ed institutions and colleges, in fact, in the private space to add the voice. We've written, I wrote to the then minister, Dr. Nzimande, and he had been my boss in inverted commas when I worked in the department, and then Dr. Naledi Pandor became minister, and then he came back. So I know him well, and I know the DG very well, and Buti Manamela, who was the deputy minister, used to be one of my students. So I had a very, very positive relationship, if I can call it that, especially with Buti Manamela, who firmly carried the same belief that the NSFAS bursary the means test should change. Now, obviously, with everything that's happened, the elections and the government of national unity, can I be very naughty? Do you know what a GNU, there's another thing for a GNU. It's an animal. It's a Vilibius. Go and look, GNU, go and look it up. It's a Vilibius, and it's got a head like a box and horns, and it's got a big front section, and then this thin body and spindly legs. So we wonder who's going to be who in that GNU. Sorry, I didn't say that. But it just fascinates me that while we're battling, people are waiting. So we're waiting to see who will be a minister and a deputy minister and carry that conversation forward. But it wasn't an outlandish request, I want to say that. It was already being entertained, that the NSFAS should be the means test. And we have strong support from the National Development Plan, in fact, which says about private and public providers, higher ed, being able to access funding.
Thank you very much. Okay, we've got time for 2 more questions. So I'll take the lady at the back.
Hi, my name is Tabile. I'm from Amateur Collective. I have absolutely nothing to do with education. I just work with youth, and I don't know anything about private higher education, except the fact that as a parent of a Gen Z, I might have no choice but to fork out money for him to attend a private higher education institution, because the classes are smaller and they care about their mental health and all that other stuff that they always worry about. But what I wanted to ask was, our lovely moderator mentioned that institutions, that corporates that can give money need a certain bouquet of qualifications that don't necessarily go hand in hand with said institution. And I wanted to ask, has anyone thought about using BEE as a model for funding said education? I know it's a shot in the dark and probably will cover a certain percentage of the students, but when you look at how they're tying learnerships with their BE models and everything, I think there might be something there. Because this is being recorded, I'm not going to name names, but I do know of a certain individual that is using BE and learnerships, and it's actually giving them quite a lot of money in their pocket, which is not necessarily a good thing. The other thing I wanted to ask is, have the private higher institutions thought about giving a structured gap year? So, for example, not everyone that finishes matric actually wants to have a higher education qualification, or they don't know what they want to study. Some of them get an FSAS in the public institutions, then they bomb out because they were not ready, because they were not correctly guided, or they made the wrong choices. But if you could get private corporations to fund or sponsor a structured gap year where they go into the various departments and also get some hands-on work readiness experience, that's a model that might work. So yeah, that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you very much. All right, someone else had their hand up.
In South Africa, at the moment, there's a large section of our society that is cut off from access to technology. So if we revamp our curriculum to, keep up the pace or to keep abreast with the changes in the world of work, are we not risking, cutting off people who already are actually lagging behind in terms of access to technology? Maybe we risk crafting programs that are elitist, right? But I think Dr. Shirley Lloyd mentioned the fact that when you design your curriculum, you must have the lowest denominator in mind. How feasible is this? Because technology is changing. Right now we are having a critical dialogue. By the time we all get home, something has already changed. So how do we balance this? How do we balance keeping abreast with technology and also developing curriculum that actually makes our graduates employable? Because there are a lot of graduates out there in the labor market, and they simply don't possess the skills that are needed. There's been a skills shift in our economy, right? And the unemployment that we're experiencing at the moment is it's partly a skills-based, unemployment problem, where the skills that the youth have are not commensurate with the skills needed in the industry, because it's now a knowledge economy. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Leo. You bring up a very significant point, and perhaps to layer that would then be the tension that sits between equalizing access to education, remaining profitable, and aligning to what the world needs. And at the very baseline, collaboration. At the very baseline, that's how you're going to get there. By collaborating, by understanding what resources, what strengths you have, and what your counterparts within industry are able to provide accessibility to, so that you are able to meet those needs. And if we start there, then I think some of the solutions are going to come.
Thank you. My name is George Gabriel, and I'm here on behalf of an organization called Lucha Linaco, which means the youth have it. And we are a think tank. Actually, we'd like to call ourselves an action tank. And one of our key focus areas is trying to understand the entire issue of funding for tertiary education to make sure that students can get in, succeed and graduate. So my first question is focused very simply on what impact does finances have on the ability of a student to graduate? So we know there are bursaries at the beginning, but are they able to complete? In other words, what is the dropout rate or non-completion rate at your institutions related to the fact that the finances aren't available? My second question is, I myself, you hear the American accent, went to a private education institution in the United States, 2,400 students. It raises millions every year from its alumni association, and I am a part of that network of 40,000 alumni who keep in contact and help each other with work opportunities. It is a gold mine, and I'm literally shocked to hear that isn't happening because it's a massive amount of potential income that would generate income towards bursaries, without a doubt.
Thank you.
I think certainly the alumni issue in private higher ed is a little bit more difficult than in the public ones here, and it is something we haven't really engaged with sufficiently. I served on a university council, a private higher ed institution in South Africa, and I served for 5 years as the alumni representative. And we did everything and anything we could to gather the alumni, and we had some really powerful, if you want to use the word, or influential people. But the sense was that the institution was just there to get that qualification. But it appeared as if their loyalty lay rather in, and if I can call it that, their first institution, which was a public one, because that was the known space. So, for example, the person might have been to University of Stellenbosch, University of Pretoria, and they were very, very active as alumni there. But the minute you put them as an alumnus of the private higher ed institution, it became almost a difficult concept for them to embrace. So it is something, I agree with you, that has to be really, really looked at. Your first part of your question, part of the answer, and this is, there are also real, proper, empirical statistics to prove it. The throughput rate in private higher ed is higher than the throughput rate in public higher ed institutions, by quite a few percent. So you would find private higher ed might have a throughput rate of about, when they graduate, from the students that started, out of every 100, you might have ending at 43 out of that 100 graduating. And in the public space, it might be between 10, 15, 18% of those who started graduating. So there is definitely a higher throughput percentage for those, but the ones that are able to go the road and finish are definitely those that do have some kind of financial support, financial backing, and we find that very many students have to drop out and go and do other work or else fund their studies through other means. And that, of course, isn't the best. So funding, I think, is one of the very, very big issues for student success and throughput rate at the end of the day.
Thank you, Dr. Lloyd. One more question, and then we have
thank
to
you.
call
Thank
it
you very
a
much.
night.
I'll be short. My name is Somaza Mazizi. Prof, I just wanted to know, man, I mean, not so long ago, first I wanted to ask the relationship between the private sector and the public sector. How is it in terms of notes sharing? I mean, this question comes from a place where we have seen private institutions being closed, being deregistered. I believe that could have been prevented before that, or it's just a matter of a management crisis. Just want to know that, Prof. Thank you very much. Maybe to everyone.
You want to take that one, Dr. Oesen?
Okay. In my own experience, I frequently engage with colleagues and peers at public institutions. I think the case that you are referring to, the recent case, if I am correct, based on the information at my disposal, there were management leadership type of, I mean, John Maxwell says everything rises and falls on leadership. Everything. So that could be the beginning of it. But it's in a very unfortunate that it happened. I just want to, on a personal level, on the international business conference that I've never been part of, I'm on the board of that. I'm the only private person on the board. It's people from Northwest, from UWC, from UJ, from etc., etc. So what I'm trying to say is where we all as individuals are at. Let your light shine in your little corner where you are. That is how I influence and create awareness with people in the public space. So in the spaces that I move, there are really no quibbles about the value that we as private institutions contribute to the higher education space. I know of instances of people in the that's full-time in public, but do weekend or evening contracting, lecturing and things for private institutions. And that's also how they then get the lived experience of what happens within our own internal mechanisms. Come into our house, let's show you around. It's lacquer here, man. But maybe just circling back to the regrettable incident of a little while ago. You know, the perception might be that all privates are then thrown under one blanket. But that is where you and I, where we put the records. And I must say there were a number of privates that very quickly put out word on social media, etc., and even in the press, in the media, not pointing a finger, but just saying, we're okay, eh? You know, and we are even willing to assist. Because that was, when I heard that first time, I thought, oh my word, what about the poor students?
But I think something that I'd like to throw in there, it wasn't only a leadership issue in that particular institution. I think everybody was responsible, from the regulators who should have picked up long ago, to the department when that institution was registering and re-registering and supposed to be submitting their documentation, right through to the financial institutions. I think there was culpability across a number of layers. And you need to accept that people need private higher ed and public. We have to make our road by walking responsibly, accountably and reflectively. We have to do that. And that was Samuel Isaacs used to always use that phrase. So I think there was responsibility across the different layers. There was accountability across the layers, and they should have been called to book long ago before what happened. And thankfully, as you say, there were people that said, let's come alongside and help you.
Thank you, Dr. Lloyd. And now I'm going to give Dr. Lloyd an opportunity to give us our closing remarks.
Thank you so much. I just want to tag along with the last two speakers and just lay this question in front of you. I mean, with this recent debacle and all of a sudden the whole private higher education industry is in question, when that happens in the public sphere, and it does everybody all of a sudden say, oh my word, should we now suspect every single public institution? It's silly. And actually, if an institution like UNISA, for instance, falls, they are a much larger percentage of that public sector than is 1 or 2 or 3 institutions in the private sector. And I'm only talking now about properly registered and accredited institutions. So I think sometimes we run away with things a bit. There are bad apples in every industry, and I do completely agree with the shared accountability here. But so there are bad apples everywhere, but let's focus on the job that we have to do. I think we agreed, all of us, that the challenges are many and the job is big. So there's work to do. Let's get to it.
And without further ado, that brings us to the end of this evening's Critical Dialogues. Dr. Lloyd, Dr. Oesen, Umo Lio, and Dr. Lio, thank you very much for giving your time to engage in a stimulating conversation, in a provocative one, also educating us, in areas that I think many can agree we had no line of sight. And as Dr. Lio said, there's work to be done, and we all belong to an ecosystem that must contribute to how we access the solutions. And that is it. A very good evening.
Thank you, everyone.